Welcome, everyone. We are so glad you are joining us on this day of inspiration. My name is Larissa Treese, Program Coordinator for Coral Reef Alliance, located on Maui, Hawaii. As in our practice, we would like to begin the day with an acknowledgement of the land. For me, I am in the Ahupua'a, or Hawaiian Division of Land, of Keokea. So feel free to put the land upon which you are in the chat. We are so lucky today to be joined by students and activists Amalia Rajparia and Annie M., filmmakers Melina Fagan, Reefs at Risk, and Laura Nix, Inventing Tomorrow, and in conversation with Molly Michelson, a senior producer at the California Academy of Sciences, and Dr. Madhavi Colton, Executive Director of the Coral Reef Alliance. This conversation is part of the Redford Stories Project and is intended as an opportunity to come together to help inspire and energize inclusive conversations in science and climate science, and look at ways science and stories about science can provide an essential access to shared learning. So let's jump in with two of our movies, and then we'll have some conversations after. So first, we like to share Reefs at Risk. Reefs at Risk is set on the beautiful beaches of Hawaii and explores the harmful effects some sunscreen chemicals have on coral reefs, marine life, and people. Reefs at Risk supported the effort to pass legislation in Hawaii banning sunscreens with the harmful chemicals oxybenzone and octinoxate from being sold in the state by January 1st, 2021. Yay! The film was featured in the Washington Post Express, the LA Times, Mother Jones Magazine, Eco Watch, and was linked in an article in Vogue, which has been featured in many local newspapers. The filmmakers have done numerous talks and sunscreen swaps at community screenings throughout Hawaii.
Tourism is Hawaii's #1 industry, and we are very grateful to have visitors come from all over the world to enjoy our beaches and the rest of our natural resources. However, the marine environments around an island are very fragile, and so the more visitors that we have, the more of an impact they have on all of our beaches.
We started noticing declines in coral reefs around 1980, 1985, which is about the same time that personal care products like sunscreen lotion were used prominently by tourists going to these beaches and visiting these coral reefs. What we're doing is we're looking at oxybenzone, a common UV chemical found in many sunscreen lotions and aerosol sprays. Oxybenzone can cause an adverse effect in coral at 62 parts per trillion. That is equivalent to 1 drop of water in 6.5 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So you don't need a lot to cause a lot of damage.
The researchers that offered this revolutionary paper, they in the lab have seen that these compounds are lethal to coral larvae. It also sterilizes them and it bleaches them at a lower temperature by 10 degrees. What that means is that if we lose a coral to bleaching, or if it's damaged just from climate change, it can't recover.
Corals are animals. They actually have a basic immune system that is a lot like humans. They react when they're being stressed out. They're white, they're stressed. It's a lot like us when we're sick. We're pale and we're not as healthy, and that's what's happening to the coral. I've worked the last nearly decade on coral health and disease. I never thought in my lifetime I would see reefs just completely wiped out by bleaching. The level of alarm that I have now is higher than I thought it would ever be. We lose those reefs, we lose a large amount of income from tourism, from biomedical products, from coastal protection, and really importantly to communities, from food.
Oxybenzone is a toxicant. It can cause harm to humans, it can cause harm to mammals, it causes harm to fish at particular concentrations.
As it relates to human health, these chemicals are linked to causing breast cancer to become more aggressive, polluting breast milk, causing Hirschsprung deformity in newborns, and associated with women's uterine diseases, threaten male sexual health, and can damage DNA. There's evidence that oxybenzone is even showing up in our aquifers and our drinking water.
What we put on our skin, it's going to wash off and it flows into the ocean, whether you're in the middle of the U.S. and the mainland or you're right next to the reef.
Mother dolphins are exposed all the time to oxybenzone because it's there polluting the marine environment. And when the mother dolphins breastfeed, oxybenzone that it's contaminating the mother passes on to the baby.
Mr. President, I rise in strong support of the measure.
Please proceed.
Colleagues, this legislation is a big step forward for the protection of our coral reefs, marine life, and human health. It will be the first law passed not only in the country, but in the entire world to ban sunscreens that contain the dangerous chemicals oxybenzone and octinoxate.
We have these global stressors that in the foreseeable future, they're not going away. Temperature is rising. We have increased CO2, ocean acidification. But there's the local stressors. And if we can minimize those, we give the corals a far greater capacity to respond, adapt, and survive. So what's the easiest thing you control? Don't put sunscreens that have harmful chemicals on them. You can just put on a long sleeve rash guard. You can use lotions that don't have that same impact. There's little decisions like that that if we all do, collectively is going to help this environment.
That was such amazing information. And I know for me, it hits home, but it's definitely not just Hawaii that's affected. But it's wonderful to see the impact that storytelling and filmmaking can have. Our second clip is from Inventing Tomorrow. Inventing Tomorrow follows 6 young scientists from Indonesia, Hawaii, India, and Mexico as they tackle some of the most complex environmental issues facing humanity today, right in their own backyards. Each student is preparing original scientific research that he or she will defend at the Intel International Science and Engineering Fair. Framed against the backdrop of the urgent environmental challenges we now face, Inventing Tomorrow immerses the audience in a global view of the planetary crisis through the eyes of the generation that will be affected by it most. In this clip, we'll be watching the students from Mexico as they represent their country as scientists on the world stage.
Hay que prepararnos para dar la presentación en inglés.
Ajá.
How are you?
Está difícil, pero bueno. We are fine. Ahí en la preparatoria, cuando tomamos el camión, nosotros vemos que ¡pum!, te dan el flechazo de smog, de diésel quemado.
Monterrey hay muchos problemas con la contaminación del aire, pero otra de las cosas que más me marcó fue cuando uno de mis tíos murió a causa de una enfermedad respiratoria.
Monterrey es una de las ciudades con más industrias en México. Hay demasiada actividad industrial, pues simplemente no se puede parar. Lo que nosotros buscamos resolver fue el decrecimiento de contaminantes más fuertes que hay en el aire. ¿A quién está?
Se regulan un poco, más o menos unos 30.
Nuestra hipótesis fue que por medio de una pintura fotocatalítica se pudieran decrecimiento de los dos contaminantes, NO2 y SO2. Con esto.
Dióxido de titanio se utiliza normalmente en las pinturas,
Ya, eso.
pero nosotros le agregamos estas propiedades fotocatalíticas.
Cuando está en contacto con el sol, los contaminantes se transforman en productos inocuos.
De probar nuestra pintura, nos dimos cuenta de que daba una capa de residuo o es soluble en el agua.
Cuando llueve se pueden ir esa película que se forma, cae en el suelo y las plantas las utilizan como nutrientes. Es un ciclo.
Es algo equivalente a sembrar árboles. Vamos a sembrar árboles para eliminar un contaminante que es el CO2. Bueno, pues vamos a pintar muchas casas para que actúen también como arbolitos que están eliminando la contaminación.
Exacto, si no podemos detener las actividades industriales, al menos podemos dar alternativas para poder ayudar al ambiente.
¿Sabes lo que quiero decir? Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? ¿Cómo se pronuncia esto? How do you pronounce this? How do you pronounce this?
Creo que la competencia haría un gran cambio en nuestras vidas. Nos daríamos cuenta de que algo que nosotros comenzamos con muy poco podría llegar a reconocerse. Ahí nos daríamos cuenta de que estamos haciendo algo bien.
Hemos visto deportistas en las Olimpiadas, dan todo su esfuerzo para representar a nuestro país. Yo también quiero representar a mi país, pero mi categoría sería la ciencia.
Wow, talk about inspiring. Thank you for joining us and watching these two films that highlight the importance of science and the value of storytelling. I don't know about you, but watching those is exactly what we need, especially right now. The hope and excitement about what creative and innovative people can achieve for our future. So next up, I'm thrilled to be joined by this distinguished, amazing, diverse panel. I'll be asking some questions to all six of you. So feel free to jump right in and answer them, or then I'll start calling on you. So up first is a question for all of you, whoever wants to speak up first. Can you tell us a little bit about what brought you to this moment in your careers and in your activism? Melina?
Sure. Thanks everyone for tuning in and being here. For me, it's been a long journey. Like, I guess I'll start. I grew up in Hawaii and was really close to the environment, and I had a very health conscious mom. In high school, I actually went to the same high school as one of the characters in Laura Nix's film. From Hawaii, Hilo High School. And in high school, I was really passionate about the environment. I was president of the environment club. And I liked science, but I wasn't good at science. Um, so what I was good at is film. Had more of a creative mind, and I was very activisty and wanted to educate people. And then when I went to college, I pursued filmmaking, but I still had these passions of like, I want to save the environment, I want to help the earth, or I want to teach people about how to be healthier so that they can help save the world more. Um, but so in college, I discovered documentary filmmaking, and that just really clicked. So I started using my tools or my skills as a filmmaker to projects that I found really inspiring and that needed to be told. So being from Hawaii, I came across, it was like the first article written. Like since then, there's been so many articles written about the sunscreen issue and oxybenzone, but a friend handed me the very first one, and I contacted the scientist Craig Downs, and we just said, hey, we need to make this film. Like, people don't know about this issue, and a film can really help. So I made this film with my mom, Lynn Pelletier, and we just said, oh, we need to help get this bill passed in Hawaii, and then other places will adopt it. So it's really been a long journey, but just fueled by passion to try to help this world.
No, that's awesome. And to blend, your talent and your passion in such a great way. That's amazing. Thank you. The next question was, what was your experience of science when you were younger, like in school or whatever, if there's a standout moment, inspiring moment, someone that affected you? How about Molly?
I do remember, I remember going to the Chabot Science Center and holding a beaker that had dry ice. And I was just astonished that it could do such a thing. It was fantastic. And then I also remember looking through a telescope and seeing Saturn, where you can actually see the rings. And that blew me away. It was so close, yet I knew it was so far away.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, that's definitely, it's a big, big world out there. I'm just going to call out Dr. Madhavi. The next question for you. Why is communication around science important, and what encourages people to engage who do not necessarily consider them scientists?
What a fabulous question, Larissa. Thank you so much. When I have young people approach me fairly often. They want to become marine biologists, and they're really interested in talking to someone like me who's been trained as a marine biologist. And frequently they want to say, what should I study? What should I do in school? And my answer is always follow your heart and your passion, because in conservation, we don't tell a fish what to do. We don't tell a coral what to do. We talk and work with people and help try and shift behaviors so that people recognize what will benefit them in the long term. And so for me, communications, science without communications exists on a dusty bookshelf somewhere. It's really getting the word out there so that everyone understands the role that they can play in creating a healthier environment for all of us, right? For us individual people, for the corals, for the fish that live on those reefs. So for me, that communications in science is just it's like this, or it needs to be like this.
Yeah, that's perfectly said, because I know a lot of people get intimidated when they hear the word science. So no, that's great. All right, this next question is going to be both for Molly and Annie. So I'll ask it, and then if either of you guys can jump in, and then the other, I can ask it again after if you want. But if you were going to make a film right now, what would it be about and why?
I guess I am really passionate about the ocean and seals, and sea lions is like my favorite thing. And I've done many projects around that. So I think, and I like educating people about it. And you don't have to necessarily talk about what you're going to do about it, but just telling people about what you're excited about. So I would probably just make a film about seals and sea lions and pinnipeds and how interesting and cool they are as an animal.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, it's definitely when you're passionate about something, it kind of becomes infectious for other people. So that's great. So Amalia, if you're going to make a film right now, what would it be about and why?
I would say I would make a film about success stories that I've heard about people, how they've influenced the environment in a positive way, because I think that would really inspire me and people around me to be like, oh, that kid did it. She's my age, or she is passionate about the same thing that I am. And seeing that as an example, I think would really motivate me personally. And I'm sure all of my friends would be motivated by seeing examples of success stories that have helped the environment in a positive way.
Oh, that's awesome. And honestly, like with Amalia and Annie and you guys with your young age, but already accomplishing so much, it's just so encouraging and so exciting for all ages, I feel like. So thank you for doing what you're already doing and keep it up. All right, so this will be a question for anyone who wants to jump in. How can science best serve as kind of a universal language?
I'll answer that. I think that science is one of the best ways that we can seek solutions to things that we are facing. One thing that I noticed when I was making Inventing Tomorrow is that one of the subjects of the film actually says this at the beginning, is that so many of our problems are the same all over the world. So the water issues that we experience and issues with air safety and not having clean air and clean water, the threats from climate change, et cetera, these are now universal issues. We feel them in some places more than others, but the goal with Inventing Tomorrow was to introduce audiences to young people who were observing the world around them, who were looking at their own communities and recognizing that there were issues that were there, and then proceeding to ask questions about, well, why is this happening? And then that was what really motivated them to be able to create solutions. It has to start with noticing what's going on where you live, and then starting to connect the dots so that you can start to think about how you can create change. And the beautiful thing about science is that the tools with which you use to determine what those problems might be, that diagnosis might be the same all the way across the world. And so you can take those and apply it, even if it's you came up with it, it was inspired by something that was local to you, you might be able to take that diagnosis or that solution and apply it to someplace else on the other side of the globe.
I think that's really lovely, Laura. And to me, that really builds on what Amalia was saying as well. Because one of the things that we try and do in conservation is show that you can solve a problem. And I think in many ways, the Melina's film does a great job at that, right? There's a problem, you can actually solve that problem. And it's by describing that solution using common language and then sharing that solution that starts to inspire others to pick up that work and move it forward. So I see some really nice connections between what Laura and Amalia was saying in the films.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually got a live question that I'm going to ask for any of you six, if you want to jump in, or maybe even a couple of you can answer it. What environmental problem, or what environment, like all encompassing problem, would you first want to solve and or help destroy?
I'll start by just referencing those two films. What they did was not take on the world. They took on small issues, both films did, where it was actually, and in Melina's film, the guy even says, you know, this is something we can do right now. And I think in Laura's film, not just the clip we saw, but throughout, it's little issues that people can make a difference in their own community. So we can look at big solutions, but those become very overwhelming. And I think this, looking at on a community scale, anyone can make a difference.
Yeah, definitely. Well said. Because it can be very overwhelming when you're looking about everything, and sometimes even depressing. But when you do start focusing on it, then you can make a very large impact, and then check that off and move on to the next one. Because fortunately, right now we have quite a few.
And just to add to that, we focused. We didn't focus, we focused on students who were focusing, right? So we found students who were very focused on air and water issues. And it's funny because oftentimes my film is described as a climate change film, which I always find really surprising because the words climate change are actually never mentioned once in the entire film. And I think that the issues of being able to source healthy water and healthy air are two things that are very visceral for people, and they're very immediate for many people around the world. And I think that those two are on-ramps in a way to kind of get people to start thinking about these issues on the way to start thinking about climate change, because climate change is a systemic problem, and it's much more involved, and it's been highly politicized, and it's just this like big gargantuan existential threat. But if we start with things that are really palpable to us and physical, that we immediately need to be able to drink clean water and breathe clean air, I think that the focus on those two things in the classroom can be really helpful as a way to kind of get students oriented towards thinking about these larger issues.
Yeah, and you know, in your video, Laura, and what you were kind of talking about is just like getting them to think beyond. And I really liked when they were talking about, like, we see, you know, Olympic athletes going on, and then they're, you know, discovering this stuff. And it's, you know, it's, I think, I guess to me, selfishly, more important. So it's really nice to kind of get it thinking for other people too. So here's another question for you guys. How does someone who has never experienced the ocean, how do you get them, or how should they care about it? Somalia, would you want to take that?
Sure. Well, I was, well, for the majority of my life, I lived in New York City, which is on the coast, so it's pretty close to the ocean. But I went to the beach and I went and saw the ocean probably once a year. So I never really experienced it. And I found many, many TV shows and stories that I heard about the ocean and about the deep influence that it has on everybody else in the world. I found a specific show, I don't know, probably none of you have heard of it, but it's called Ocean Mysteries, and I absolutely loved it. I've watched every single episode probably 30 times. I love that show, and I found it deeply inspiring, and that's how I would say, because I had never really experienced it. I didn't know what it meant really, but I still was deeply affected by the ocean as a whole, and I really wanted to dedicate my life to the ocean just from that show and these stories that I've heard.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I guess you're part of what, you know, the question was framed about. What about someone who has been raised with the ocean? How do you, you know, if that's kind of your norm, how do you get someone who hasn't either been around it or not accustomed or even comfortable with it? How do you get them to care?
I have an answer. Well, a lot of problems that affect the ocean also affect humans themselves as a being. So like making the connections between like overfishing and pollution in the ocean and to animals are can be connected to humans. And if you don't care about the ocean, like you might not care about the ocean, but like you do care about yourself and your health and well-being. So making those connections from the ocean and animals to humans themselves, I think is very important.
Yeah, that is. And a lot of times we just think of what happens on land or what happens in the ocean, and it is truly connected, whether you're directly connected to it or not. So, yeah, that's a great point. All right, another question. How do you or how can people learn about science, especially if they're not maybe immediately interested in it? How do you get them to start being interested or starting to learn about it?
I think that the more that you are able to connect people to a personal experience or a personal environment, you can get people engaged with science. I was a humanities kid. I was like a music humanities young person. I was not an avid science student, even though I made a film about science. But I found that what makes the young people that I've shown the film to and I see them get excited is when it's attached to their world, when you start talking about what is immediately around you. So I think the more that you can personalize it and make it about a local habitat, the more that people are going to understand that it's not something abstract, that it's about our world. It's about the world that we live in, and that we are, as humans, we are one of the animals that live in nature that we can understand in this larger connection.
Right. Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, thank you. So this question is going to be for the two filmmakers, Melina and Laura. What inspired you to make your specific film? I think you guys touched upon it a little bit, but what impact do you hope it has going forward? And was there, like Laura, you kind of alluded that it wasn't really a climate change movie, but you started doing that. So were there any other unexpected findings for either of you while you were kind of putting this film together? Maybe you started with one idea and it became into another. Melina? And then we'll go to Laura.
I was originally making a feature film about the toxic chemicals in all body care products. And it was a feature length film and just exploring a lot of different products and chemicals. And in some ways that's great, but it can also be like overwhelming. So what we did with Reefs at Risk, one is our feature film wasn't going to be finished in time to have an impact on this bill. So we knew like legislators in Hawaii were going to be voting on a bill. So what we did is we made a short 10-minute film, and we were sending like drafts of it to legislators, and we got it screened on all incoming flights to Hawaii on Hawaiian Airlines. And Upworthy picked it up. Like, we released it online as soon as we could. We were just like rushing to get it done. But it focused on just 2 chemicals in one product category, which is what this bill was about. It's a lot harder to get legislation passed to ban the thousands of harmful chemicals that are polluting our bodies and our oceans and our earth. But we had success with 2 of them. So really, Reefs at Risk kind of was the surprise or the spin-off from the original projects, and it just had such an overwhelming response. Like, we distributed it straight to Facebook. We just uploaded it to Facebook, and it was being shared. It kind of not went viral, but it was spreading like a fire, just naturally. And it was from all over the world. There's coral reefs, and there's people who care about the oceans, even if they don't live near the oceans. We tried to make that connection in our film. If you breathe oxygen, a lot of your oxygen comes from the ocean, and a lot of our diet relies on healthy marine environments. So it was just wonderful to see the response, and my hope or wish for it is that it just continues and that this topic becomes common knowledge. Like, oh yeah, I'm going to use sunscreen to protect myself. I'm going to use the non-nano zinc. Like, I'm hoping that just becomes super common awareness, and it's happening.
Yeah, it definitely is, and thank you for making it more in people's faces, and an easier opportunity for them to learn. So Laura, what inspired you originally to make your film?
Actually, climate change was what inspired me to make the film, but as a storyteller, I realize how difficult it is to make films about that right now, which is why I ended up focusing on young people who were focusing on air and water. And then as we were making the film, we discovered something when we were casting the movie and going around and talking to young people all over the world who were finalists for ISIF. We discovered that the students that we were speaking to in the developing world, if I was talking to students in like India, Indonesia, Pakistan, Nigeria, maybe 60 to 70% of the projects that were being submitted to ISIF were focused on having an environmental impact. So we had this like huge choice of environmental projects to choose from. And when I came back to the United States, that number dropped down to 10%. So only 10% of the ISIF finalists from the United States were doing science that was intended to have an environmental impact. And I was completely shocked by that. So since we completed the film, we started an impact campaign that is targeting strategic communities around the United States, mostly frontline communities, so that we're looking at young people who are living in urban and rural communities who are experiencing many of the effects of this environmental degradation. So they feel personally motivated to be able to go do this kind of scientific research because they know about it, because they're living it. So a lot of the suburban kids that end up in this science competition environment, which is more an elite environment, they have the education that puts them in that pipeline and they're in a system that gets them there. But many of the young people who are living in the communities and experiencing this firsthand and would be motivated to go create these solutions are not necessarily getting that kind of education that gets them to the place where they might be competing at ISIF. So our entire program is meant to get young people in these communities excited about looking at their community, observing, asking the right questions, seeking solutions, and seeing that STEM can be a solution and a career path for them. And looking at young people, seeing women, seeing people of color, and being like, I can be that scientist. It's not just some white guy in a lab. That can be me. So our film is available for free to any teacher in the United States who would like to get a copy of it. You can go to our website, inventingtomorrowmovie.com, and you can get a DVD of the movie sent to you. We just created 2 shorts. We have lesson plans. We're doing 2 new lesson plans for the shorts. So we're on the 3rd year of our impact campaign in the educational community. And it's all about trying to engage young people to seek these kind of solutions for their own communities.
Yeah, and even just that short clip, you definitely are a little scratching up the surface of seeing, the diversity of what you guys are bringing to the attention. So that's great. Molly, I have a question for you, since you kind of work at a very cool place that I love. What are the power of stories with science in the context of a museum or aquarium or?
Right. Well, I'll just use these 2 films as an example. Like the films, you could say there's chemistry in both of those movies, but it's the people, especially in the Inventing Tomorrow, it's the people that connect you to the stories. The chemistry is very cool, but it's the people that you relate to. And so that's the power of storytelling, is making it relatable, making a connection. So at the California Academy of Sciences, as you mentioned, it's seeing the big tank, it's standing in front of those fish and watching them for maybe minutes on end. That it's access that you get that maybe Melina in Hawaii and you, Larissa, in Hawaii can see right out your back door, but lots of people can't. So, and then, we have an immersive planetarium where we can take you to the smallest microbe in the soil all the way out to the cosmos. So, I mean, I think we have a lot of different ways at the Academy to tell stories, but science centers do, and they're right in everyone's backyard. I mean, that's the beauty of it. And I'm very lucky to be able to tell all these stories, because we also have, we have researchers who study everything from spiders and scorpions to, everything. So we're really fortunate to tell all those stories. There's too many.
Yeah, no, you guys definitely have a little bit of diversity, and I am grateful for facilities like yours that can bring to the attention and see things that people would not be able to. So we have time for one last question, and we got a live question coming in, and I'm going to point this at Dr. Madhavi. It's kind of a big one. What do you think is the biggest environmental problem on Earth currently, and how do you think we can solve it? You or we or...
Well, I will definitely put we in that sentence because big environmental problems, and one of my takeaways from this conversation is that the challenges that our planet, that we as a species face here, are huge. And so there's not one solution, there's not one kind of person that's going to solve that problem. I even think about that with science. We need marine biologists, we need filmmakers, we need storytellers, we need chemists, we need economists. Like, we need all sorts of different people to come together to solve the challenges we face. So for me, I work at the Coral Reef Alliance. Our focus is on coral reefs, which are one of the ecosystems most threatened by climate change. A slight change in temperature on coral reefs, as you probably know, leads to them bleaching and starting to starve, and then they can die. And so for me, the greatest threat facing us is the existential one of climate change. But for me, I think that there's actually hope here on a few different angles. And perhaps most of my hope personally comes from some of the research I've been leading, which shows that these ecosystems can actually evolve to deal with climate change. They can increase the amount of temperature that they can deal with if we do things at local scales to reduce local stresses. And this came up in the Reefs at Risk movie, where there was the researcher who was talking about, there's this massive global thing happening, but it turns out if you use a different kind of sunscreen, if you don't overfish, if we improve water treatment, wastewater treatment, if we reduce the amount of sediment that's flowing from lands into our oceans, if we control those things at local scales that we can control, then that ecosystem as a whole can then actually cope with climate change. So for me, biggest threat facing our planet, climate change for sure. If I had a magic wand, I would magically reduce emissions across the globe. We'd still be in literally hot water, so we still have to reduce those local stresses.
Yeah, that was a big question. So thank you. And it's true. It's about working together. And I think that even right now is a perfect example. We have Madhavi scientists, and we have producers, we have filmmakers, we have students, and all working together and sharing, what has worked with them, and encouraging others as well. So I think that definitely, we should just do this all the time in my world. But we're going to move on now. And we have a call to action. So a challenge that I'm going to present to some of you guys out there. So the Coral Reef Alliance team that I am so lucky to be a part of, and some of whom are watching right now. So hey guys, and in collaboration with the Redford Stories team, would like to invite you to join our work. As is highlighted in lesson 3 of the Redford Stories project curriculum, we challenge you to put together a 1 to 2 minute video public service announcement, or a PSA, that centers on the threats to coral reefs and, more importantly, the solutions. So there are 5 main areas that we encourage you to consider. But if you guys just want to focus on 1 or even just 2, maybe that stand out to you, you can feel free. So the options are ocean acidification, sedimentation, water quality, overfishing, and plastic pollution. So the Redford Stories team will be sending out information about this challenge and the rest of the program as a follow-up to today's webinar. We hope that you will join us as we all work together towards a more just, more sustainable future, not only for our population and for our planet, but for our oceans and the creatures we love that live in them. So thank you everybody so much for connecting with us today, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you so much for joining us today, to our panelists for being here. Panelists, you're welcome to stay on. Those of you still listening, feel free to head out and enjoy your day with new inspiration from this great panel.